Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is Nancy DeAngelis, and welcome to another segment in the series Remarkable Men and Women in Your Community. Tonight I'm bringing the show from one of my favorite places in my hometown, the Elmendorf. And I'm going to ask each one of you to introduce yourselves.
Hi, I'm Barbara Bielenberg. I'm president of the Egbert Benson Historical Society, and we're so happy to have you come again to our meeting. And I think this is going to be especially interesting to your viewers. It's on fruit growing, past and present, and I'd like to introduce you to Larry Thetford. Larry Thetford is a research entomologist, recently retired, and of great interest in historic farming. So, Larry, we're so pleased to have you come and do this program for us.
Thank you, Barbara. Tonight we're going to have a panel of fruit growers, and this panel represents a wide variety of experience and farms that go back over 200 years in the area of Upper Red Hook and Tivoli. So tonight we're going to compare some of those past practices back in the 19th century, maybe early 20th century, to today's fruit growing techniques. And behind me we have some examples of some of the materials that were used in the old days. For example, this barrel is what the apples were packed in and shipped in by steamboat down the Hudson River to New York City. This unit right here,
Is that an apple core?
this is what they used to press the tops of the barrels onto once they were packed with the apples. That's a top press. And for weed control, you had nothing but brute labor. So here's what they call a grub hoe. And this hoe was used to grub the weeds around each of the trees. You can understand what a back-breaking process this must have been. So, okay. Okay, we'll spread that out and see if we can get that steady.
It'll work.
Okay, maybe that'll hold.
We have that.
I'll hold it.
This here?
That's a picking bucket. Now, once the apple picker goes up the ladder, he'll fill that bucket, and that'll constitute about 40 or 50 pounds of apples, and he may be up 20 or 30 feet in the air with that weight on his shoulder and his neck. And you do that for somewheres in the 10 or 12 hours a day, and you'll have a real workout. Now that's a single apple picker used early on, especially by women, where they can cup a single apple and then yank it off the tree. Hey, John, how are you?
I want to explain to you that we do these things live, so sometimes it's a little difficult because we have very limited control. But you stated that this particular tool was used by women.
Oftentimes, because it's lighter, and they would hand pick each individual apple with that unit, yes.
Barbara, how do you come up with these wonderful programs for the Elmendorf?
Well, we just consider what's important to the history of Red Hook, and then we try to bring people who know what they're talking about to come and tell our members about it. We're very interested in spreading the word that Red Hook does have a history, and it's important. And when it comes to farming, the history continues into the present, and we hope long into the future. So,
well, ladies and gentlemen, sit back, and I hope you enjoy this evening's show. I'm going to look forward to it.
Historic aspects of our community has always been farming, and particularly in this part of the world, fruit farming. And we're very, very pleased that Larry Thetford, who is one of our 3 retiring trustees, has agreed to do this program for us tonight. Larry is recently retired also from his position with what used to be called Novartis, and I don't know what the most recent name is, I've forgotten, but anyhow, he's an entomologist and has been involved in research in agriculture and what a chemical company can and can't do to help protect the products that the farmers grow. So he's made friends of a number of farmers, and I see some very familiar faces here. And we're delighted, and I'm going to let Larry introduce his friends, but I will tell you, please, to stay afterwards. We have a really rare treat. We managed to buy 2 gallons of John Hardiman's wonderful cider before he stopped pressing, and we put it carefully away and we didn't crack the corks on it, and it still tastes good. And so if you want a last taste of real cider, we've got some from John's cidery, or whatever you call it, a winery. There's such a thing as a cidery. Anyhow, we have that and some delicious baked goods. So, Larry, I'm going to turn the program over to you.
Okay, thanks, Barbara. I'd like to introduce our panelists. We have over here in the far corner, Sid Mead, who operates Mead Orchards with his son Chuck on West Curly Corners in the Upper Red Hook area. And John Hardiman, who operates Hardiman's Orchards on 199, West 199 in Red Hook. And Dave Fraley, Rose Hill Farms in Upper Red Hook area. Or just Red Hook?
Well, close. I think your
Depends how
farm is...
flighty I want, how uppity I want to be when I'm in Redmond.
I think the Fraley Farm is about a 200-year farm, isn't it? Been designated
Yeah,
as?
a couple years more. We came there in 98, so we're a little over 200.
Yeah, right. Great. And Claude Potts, who operates an orchard in Tivoli. Let's get this evening's program started by setting the stage for comparing the past with the present fruit growing production. In 1800, almost 90% of the U.S. population was engaged in some type of direct or indirect agriculture. Today, 2% of the U.S. population now produce all the food and fiber in the United States. Now this advent, the advent of the technological advances in agriculture have enabled the rest of that population, the 98%, to engage in other things and become inventive and pursue their own interests and lifestyles. And this essentially has led to the high-tech type of lifestyle that we lead today. Today, most people have little or no concept of what it takes to actually produce an agricultural commodity. You know, they have this pristine picture of the red dairy barn and the white silo and the dairy cattle out on the emerald pasture in the distance, and they drive by the flowering orchard at 55 miles an hour, and they buy their produce at the grocery store. But to get that produce to the marketplace is really an exceptionally complex production system. And it's incredibly complex when it comes to fruit growing. In fact, fruit growing is a science. Several of the growers in the Red Hook area actually have full Cornell University BS degrees in pomology, which is the science of fruit growing. In 1875, this was the number of apple trees in New York. Each of those dots represents 5,000 trees, makes for approximately 18 million trees, and about 370,000 acres, which is approximately 1% of the total New York land area. I believe it took a long time to count all those dots. Now, when Also note some concentrations down here in this Westchester, Putnam area, which of course wasn't developed at the time, even though you still had New York City population concentration. Now let's look at it 90 years later, 1964. Little difference. We're talking 3 million trees versus 18 million trees. 85,000 acres compared to the 370,000 acres. That represents an 84% decline in numbers of trees. Now you might ask, what were the reasons for this? Well, I think there are threefold. Number one, the farms of the early times, the 19th and early 20th century, the farms were much more diverse. Practically every farm had an orchard, besides some animals, grain crops, vegetables. They also used a lot of this for their own subsistence, and whatever was left over or surplus became their income. Then in 1888, there was a substantial deep freeze here in New York, and many trees were actually killed.
Winter kill.
Winter killed, that's correct. We have some photos in the archives here in Red Book of people stepping out of their second floor Victorian house window onto the top of the snow, and the cross bars of the telephone poles are only about a foot above the snow. You can just imagine. Well, that was really quite the rough winter. Thirdly, it's market competition. With the ability of transportation and storage control and refrigeration, you now have competition from other fruit-growing areas that can compete with our own local area, such as from the state of Washington, Michigan, South Africa, Chile, and not too far from now, possibly China, once they get the Yankees dam and they're planting trees like crazy there. As a matter of fact, here's kind of a shot of the typical farm in the old days. You see, it's a regular farm that they have. There's just a little orchard patch. And if we note this is the actual the advertisement for the sale of this Elmendorf property way back in the 1800s. And they say with about 70 or 80 good apple trees, the half bearing this year, and some very good plum trees. So you see, even the Elmendorf had their own little orchard here. Now let's look at 1998. We're talking about an acreage of about 55,000. That's still a drop in acreage from 85,000. However, the tree numbers have increased to almost 11 million. And this we'll get into when we get into the panel discussion, why we get this kind of change in balance. With that, what I'm going to do is present then discussion topics to our panel. Along with that, I'll show a few overlays which we can use to reference, and we'll just kind of wing it from now on. Okay, first question. When choosing an orchard site, what are the primary specs that one looks for? When you're going to start a new orchard, guys ever plant any trees?
Well, first I'd move to China and buy cheap land and have cheap. Elevation.
Okay, why?
Spring frost.
Spring frost.
Okay, for air drainage, right?
Air drainage.
Exactly.
You'll notice the concentration on that one overhead you put up pretty much defines where the food growing regions are today. They're there primarily because of the microclimates. Proximity to the Hudson River, within basically, I would say, a mile and a half, some places less. Proximity to Lake Ontario in western New York, and then the northern New York Champlain Valley. So these provide, they're more temperate climates in the spring. You don't get as extreme temperature changes. And the elevation in these particular areas, you'll notice that most orchards you see are on hillsides. Today, another thing that I would look at very closely would be water source, because we're planting dwarf trees. They're much less tolerant to drought, so you need to be able to have access to water to keep the roots, which are not deep rooted as the older standard trees, well watered to keep the tree growing and produce the fruit.
And if that land is not, if that soil is not so well drained, so say typically kind of wet, what problems can be caused with wet soil?
You can actually suffocate the roots still.
Yeah.
If there's too much water laying around the roots, and certain root stocks are more susceptible to heavy soil conditions. Some root stocks perform better.
Right. There's also a disease, right? Phytophthora root rot that can kill these trees very quickly. In the old days, how was the soil prepared? Claude, you can take that? How would you turn that ground?
Well, actually, years back, we didn't fumigate the soil before.
Okay.
They were unheard of, the nematodes and such. And a lot of the orchards were planted in old orchards. As the older trees would die off or become obsolete for variety and such as snow apples and the old Ben Davis and some of the older trees, you replace in the same orchard with, say, McIntosh was the primary apple at that time. And then, of course, Delicious came along, and we would come to the newer varieties within the same piece of ground.
And when you prepared that ground, did you basically plow it up?
Plow it up with a team of horses,
Okay.
work it with spring-tooth harrow and disc harrows, and
Okay.
the year before, and get the ground fairly loose, and the holes were all dug by hand. You didn't have a post hole digger to dig them with, or a backhoe or trench
Okay.
digging as you do today. Today, you can plant 1,000 trees while you're planting 50 trees those days.
All right, so you used a horse and plow. What do you use today?
Of course, tractors
Tractor and a plow.
and
Right.
do it much faster, and
Right, but still the same
it's
basic.
the same basic
Yeah.
thing, but
Right.
more mechanically done. Of course, back then, the cost was still less than it is today with the machinery that you do it with.
Yeah.
Because we were paying, labor was $1 a day there compared to $10 an hour wages today.
Well, you get paid $1 a day, right?
I work for less than $1. It used to be, you'd wonder at the end of the year how much you're going to make. Now I wonder how much I'm going to lose.
Yeah, right. And with a lot of these New York well-drained soils, you plow them up, you harrow them. What do you find that you got to get rid of? And I said,
We get a good crop every year.
every year, don't you?
Stones.
Now, I went out 2 weeks ago to ask Sid and his son Chuck to attend this meeting. And how old are you now, Sid?
76.
76. And there was a 76-year-old man and two guys out in that orchard picking up rocks, throwing on the...
I was sitting on the tractor.
No. I watched. You got off that tractor half a dozen times. I stood right there and watched you. You were picking up some rocks. You probably weren't supposed to.
Did you see the rock pile?
What's that?
Did you see the rock pile?
Part of it, yeah. And I saw some of the big rocks that you got to tackle later, right? So, when you're going through these woods and hiking and everything, and you see these nice stone walls, why do you think those walls are really there? Were they there for decorative purposes?
They didn't have TV back then.
Every year they go out and they pick those rocks and then throw them in those stone walls. They
Every
would
time you
also-
work the ground, every time you work, you always get another crop of stones every
Right.
time you work it.
And they'll move up with what, frost heaving, right? A
Well,
little bit?
our plow is a little deeper or
Yeah.
what have you.
Okay.
I've seen some fields in Scotland and England that were only about 2 or 3 acres in size with 6-foot stone walls all the way around. They just had so many stones, they didn't know what to do with them.
Terrific. Okay, now, I think Claude alluded to the fact how you planted those orchards in the old days. Basically what, shovel and by hand, right?
Right, definitely.
And then, let's say in the 50s to the 70s,
Then it came into the mechanical age.
okay, what'd you use?
It started out with post hole
A
diggers,
post hole digger on the end of
Yeah.
the tractor.
and then the latest is the trench, where you go through with a planter trench, and 1 man or 2 men sit on the back, and you just plant the rock type trees within this trench, and it comes behind, covers it up, almost like planting
Tree
vegetables.
transplanter, right. Much straighter, much faster.
Right. Much more expensive in the long run to establish. New drop type orchard where you have to put in your post, the fence, the wires to hold them up, and all the extra training along the line.
Well, let's talk about that. What's the term for the types of trees that were planted, the rootstock, not the varieties, the rootstock that were planted in the old days? You said
They're
it
all
already.
standard type trees back then.
Standard trees, okay. And what was the general spacing for standard trees?
25 by 35 foot, 25 foot within the row, 30 foot
standards?
to 35 foot between the rows.
About 27 trees to the acre.
Right. I
Now we
think-
plant 500 or more.
Well, okay, so let's just talk standards for a second, okay? So you got standard trees, and some of them are even out to 40 by 40.
Yeah.
Maybe
Right,
a lot there
right.
too. So that makes about 30 or 40 trees per acre. And how long does it take a standard tree to, say, come into production?
Forever.
We used to figure 8 to 10 years to get a
8
good
to 10 years,
crop off of it.
okay? And what would be the height, let's say, of a standard tree?
I can remember them being 35 foot or higher.
35 feet. Now, just for perspective, this room, the interior of this room is only 27 feet. So if you can imagine, those tree canopies are roughly 20 feet by 20 feet in the diameter of the canopy to fill that space. These are huge, huge trees. I think it might be an old photo here. That's kind of a typical old standard tree. However, how long will standard trees remain active if they're taken care of, pruned and everything? What do you think the life, production life?
35, 45 years.
All right, okay. Now, let's skip down to a different type of tree, semi-dwarf tree. What would be the spacing on a semi-dwarf? Roughly, yeah.
Well,
If you have to ballpark it a
sort
little
of
bit.
depends, probably, I don't know, 15 by 25 or something like that, down to 12 by 20.
Okay.
I mean, that's
Yeah,
close.
these trees out, these two trees out in front of the Elmendorf are semi-dwarf. And they'll get about what height?
Well, that depends on how much you worked at. I mean, you could keep them to 12 feet, but it's probably 15 or
12 to 15?
something like that.
Right. So let's say approximately 100 to 150 trees per acre.
Yeah.
And to get, how long does it take to get those into production?
Well, it depends on how close you put them together, but it's a few years shorter than what Claude was talking about.
Right, okay. And then how long might they stay in production?
Well, that depends too. I mean, probably they would stay probably as long as a standard.
Okay.
If they were managed correctly and if the variety was still in favor, I suppose.
Mm-hmm.
We have some trees that qualify for that. They were planted in '62, so, you know, they're 40 years old and I mean, they're showing their age now, but I
Yeah,
mean, they're
yeah.
still there.
Okay. So you're maintaining the age, but you're bringing them into production a little earlier and they're smaller trees and you get more per acre.
Yeah, the whole move towards smaller trees is the efficiency, because if you look at the tree like that, there's a lot of shade on the interior parts of that, and shade doesn't contribute anything to growing apples, whereas smaller trees have less shade on the inside and it's more productive, or more of the tree canopy is productive. It's an efficiency thing.
Okay, let's talk dwarf trees. What would be the spacing on those, ballpark again? And when we say ballpark, each grower kind of has to pick their own spacing. So there's not just a spacing. So that's why we have to ballpark this a little bit.
Well, they'd be down to what, 5 by, I don't know, did you play anything closer to 12, 14 feet?
I hope not.
On purpose? And that's what, 600 trees the acre, I guess, something like that. I mean, the definition between dwarf and semi-dwarf gets kind of fuzzy because it sort of depends on your training system. And it's more of a systems approach rather than strictly saying, well, that's dwarf and this is semi-dwarf. There's been a lot of research being done in the past, I don't know, what, 20 years? As to the correct size, spacing, method to get trees into production earlier, the way to make the best use of light. And light kind of is what makes the whole thing go around. And so it's more of a systems type of differentiation.
Right. And when you say a system, a lot of these dwarfs need some type of help or support system.
Yeah.
Can you kind of describe, you know, just what do we mean, you know, by a support system? A lot of people don't understand probably that term.
Well, I've done all sorts of things. I've planted trees with stakes, individual stakes by them. I've planted trees on plastic trellis. That was a mistake. I've planted trees with a wide trellis. That was interesting. And the latest thing, like what Claude was talking about, is what's called a vertical axe. It's sort of a system that was developed in France, I believe. And you plant the tree, you put an electric conduit stake by it, or some sort of not real sturdy stake by it, and you support the stake with a wire at 8 feet high, 8 feet off the ground. And that will allow the tree to grow high, taller, quickly, and to come into production quickly.
I might say the smaller the tree, the more subject you are to the elements of Mother Nature. The smaller trees are much more subject to winter kill, which was talked about in the 30s, hitting the big trees. And, well, our other rodents are more prone, they're more prone to rodents and such, and deer. Oh, I can't grow real small trees because of all the deer we have up there in Tivoli. Between Tivoli Bays, Claremont State Park, and that riverfront, we got, you can go out in the backfield and see 50 deer at a time in the fields. So many deer up there. Very good. They are, the deer are my biggest problem.
Mm-hmm. What,
Well, a hailstorm too.
Uh,
Smaller tree, the apples are more exposed and
right.
they get hammered a lot worse than they would on a big tree.
Well, you guys lost some trees last year with that crazy windstorm too. I mean,
Yeah,
it blew right off.
At harvest time, most of them tipped over, roots sticking out on one side, tree on the other.
we found during one of those hurricane years, we got a lot of water and the root system was kind of, saturated. Then the winds seemed to vary. They would actually whip the trees around like this, and they'd be laying this way and that way, and there'd be a big hole around the trunk. So now you gotta go out and straighten these all out with wires and stakes, and so you're really subjected to these elemental problems as these guys are talking about.
Well, we didn't.
What would you say, and again, I know these are the tough ballpark, but we're just trying to give our audience some ideas. What would it cost to establish take an open acre and plant it to apples?
We're all in denial because if we really knew, we wouldn't do it. I don't know, how many years ago was that?
Yeah.
It's been a while.
Yeah.
But Cornell did figure that it would be $10,000 an acre, aside from the cost of the land. That's just planting the ground preparation, planting trees, and establishing them, and keeping them going until they produce their first crop. Now, like I said, I'm guessing 10 years ago, so it's probably 15. So it's probably $1 or $2 more than $10,000 an acre.
That's a lot of gamble. A lot of gamble. Okay, now let's talk a little about taking care of these trees. First, how about weed control? Why is weed control, especially in the early spring, so important?
The weeds take the nourishment from the soil, the moisture from the soil, and the sooner a tree gets started in the spring, the sooner it's going to come in production, and later on in the fall harden off before winter kill comes in.
Okay. And what about dandelions and other flowering weeds?
Well, there's competition for the activity, the attention, I suppose you should say, of the bees that are there that we hire to pollinate the apples. Also, dandelions are a host for tomato ring spot virus, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's another reason to keep them out of there. I mean, it looks pretty, almost yellow flowers, but
Yeah.
the other thing with weed control too is the weeds. If you think like a mouse, all those weeds down in the trees provide a real nice place to live. So if you keep the weeds away from the trees, then the mice don't come and see your trees and gnaw the bark off and kill the trees.
Yeah, if you didn't protect from mice, you could lose 30% of your trees in a few short years.
And what about weed control in the earlier years? What did you guys used to use? Go out and sit?
Nothing.
Nothing?
Oh, we mowed
Cats and dogs.
Yeah, we mowed it, that's all.
Have a lot of cats in the orchard.
A lot of what?
A lot of cats in the orchard to catch
Oh,
meadow
for
moles.
the mammals, yeah.
You tried to get them to pull the weeds, but they wouldn't.
We should have had the geese. If we had that.
So you had mowing, I guess the old sickle bars. What's this thing?
Rubbing them up. I don't.
That's a French hoe.
I call them meadow.
Rubbing hoe.
Somebody else's tool.
That's it. Didn't they used to use these around?
Well, yeah,
Right?
You-
Big old.
in the fall, you go through the orchard and rub out the weeds and the grass in a circle around the tree. And that helped prevent the mouse damage, because you took the cover that they like away from the close vicinity of the tree, and that helped. But it was a kind of a back-breaking chore.
I hear some of these old guys talking about using a scythe underneath the tree.
Oh, yeah, well, they would,
I don't know how to do that.
they would mow the orchard in the rows, and then between the trees and under the trees where they couldn't reach, they'd do with a scythe.
Yeah, you can do that on trees like that, but it's not.
Yeah, there's a little headroom there, you could stand up straight.
But that orchard's no exception.
Yeah, right.
All high limbs.
Well, they used to have the orchards high because they worked the orchards up, well, I guess sometime in the 30s they stopped doing that. They used to keep, they would sometimes plow them or disc them in the spring, and then keep a spring tooth on the orchard floor the whole summer and keep it clean, and that kept the lice out.
Yeah.
And they had the trees high so the horses could get under them.
Okay.
How would you pick them then?
Well,
Well,
some people, some people didn't work every
jump.
year they got a longer ladder. They bought longer ladders.
Are there any benefits to having weeds in the orchard? Posting beneficials?
Well,
Oh, yeah.
to some degree, we've been told that that there's some mite predators that live on the grasses and weeds on the orchard floor. But I personally have had trouble justifying letting weeds and stuff grow underneath the trees for cultivate predators, because we kill them all with insecticides we have to use. So that's, I guess the trend is to try and encourage that sort of thing. Weeds also, or some amount of vegetative growth underneath trees is good because it prevents soil erosion. Those of us who grow apples on hills don't have a whole lot of soil to
That's
spare.
That's why they gave up the clean cultivation of the orchards, because they
Another
wasn't too much
benefit of
soil.
more vegetation is you have less nitrogen
Yeah.
going to the tree. And the less nitrogen you have, the more color you get to your fruit. Now, too much nitrogen, the apple will stay more green than it does with less nitrogen. You have more controlled growth with a solid sod type cultivation.
So, as growers, you really have to understand the life cycles and the biology of a lot of these diseases and pests, insects, mites. What's happening right now with this rain?
We're all happy.
Scab.
Okay,
Oh, as far as diseases, yeah.
right.
Scab and rust.
Scab and mildew.
It's probably late for rust.
Not if you're a Rome tree.
Well, yeah, but it's late. It's late.
Yeah?
They
Yeah, check my-
might get it on the leaves, but they wouldn't get it on the
Right,
fruit.
yeah, right.
What is that scab?
Okay, would somebody describe?
Scab,
Apple scab?
apple scab, it's a disease that overwinters on the leaves of the of the apple tree. Falls on the ground, and then the next spring, with moisture, the spores are matured, and with rain they're shot into the air, and then they land on the new leaves and start to cycle over. It can be, if you have a wet year like last year, it can be a devastating disease. And rust is a similar wet weather disease, but that overwinters on the cedar tree, and it'll travel a mile or half mile or a mile.
So it's a fungus.
I don't know, is it?
Yes.
It's a fungus.
Yes, it is apple scab. Both are
Apple scab gives you these sort of grayish, blotchy looking
Roundish
lesions on
lesions.
the fruit, and then leaves in the fruit.
It's not just cosmetic.
Oftentimes in unpainted orchards, you will see late summer, all the leaves start to turn brown, start falling off a tree early. Most cases that's caused from the scab infection on the leaves.
A scab susceptible variety like Macintosh, they can lose their leaves in August, and then if they start to grow again, start to grow new leaves, why they're really in sad shape.
Right. Difference between cosmetic and mycelial penetration would be that cosmetic you could actually rub off the lesion with like sooty blotch, okay? But scab, mycelia penetrate both the apple and the leaves. Now, they mentioned that they can knock the leaves off in August. Well, by then, the scab is bad in July. Why is it so important to have that tree in good condition around the middle of July?
To grow the apples. Need leaves to grow apples.
When does that tree determine the next year's crop?
Yeah, that's true.
Okay, it's called fruit bud differentiation. So that tree in July of this year is determining the crop for the next year. So if it's in poor condition and poor reserves, you won't set any buds and fruit for the following year. So this truly is a science. You have to understand all of these relationships from a biological standpoint. Okay.
Question.
Yes, sir.
Do you use the wire mesh anymore to keep the mice from eating the bark?
That,
Not if we can avoid it. We mow a lot more religiously than we used to, and most of us use a herbicide to kill the weeds in a strip right under the tree, maybe 4 or 5 feet wide, on 2 or 3 feet on each side of the trunk of the tree, and try and keep that clear, and that accomplishes the same thing as that jobby there, only more so. And the mice don't like to be out in the open because they know they're vulnerable for hawks and other, the coyotes, foxes, all mice are their #1 source of diet. So that's the reason for it.
another thing, we've gotten away from the wire because of the expense of the wire, and we've gone in for these plastic white wraparound cones, which seem to work better, they stay on the tree better, and I think they're doing a better job. The only one drawback to it, sometimes you'll get some insects that will harbor down between the tree and this plastic type open cone.
I still prefer the wire guards. They're durable, you can reuse them, pick them out if you replace the orchard. They are a little more expensive, but it does let the sunlight penetrate the bark and does keep the disease off. So every grower uses different methods for protecting the trunks of the trees. And if you get a winter like this winter when you have deep snow cover, the mice, even if you have a clear cover, they'll migrate in.
Yeah, they can.
From the fields surrounding the orchard, even if they weren't there in the summer and the fall, they will migrate under the snow. And you can actually, as the snow goes down, you can see their trails left when the snow starts to recede. So it's still a good practice to put some sort of tree protection around them, whether it's wire guards or plastic.
And during the winter, and that, we have a lot of trouble with rabbits coming in on the snow. And we'll do the same thing, just neath the bark, just above the tree guard.
The sapphire flows just below the cadmium layer of the bark. So if you remove as far down as like a 1/4 of an inch, then the sap cannot come up through from the roots. And the tree won't get its nutrients and it'll die. So if you see a tree that's been girdled around or even partially girdled, it makes a weak tree. So it's very important to keep the lower part of the tree, the trunk, protected well.
Does it matter the size of the tree? Or you
Well-
can just young trees?
Well, if you like beef, do you want to have a brisket or do you want to have a T-bone steak? You want to have a T-bone steak, and if you're a mouse, you want the nice young bark off a young tree. As trees get older, get this flaky looking bark, that's not as appealing to them.
So you don't have to worry about it so much when they're older?
Not as much, but you still need to be vigilant and keep the orchard floor clean.
Now, getting back to the fungus again, this year has been easy on scab. We've lucked out that way up till now. But contrary to most people's belief, this dry spring we've had has been a tremendous pressure from powdery mildew on trees. When it's dry and cool or hot as it had been, powdery mildew is a big problem, especially on certain varieties.
Are the apples edible if they have the fungus? I mean, do they?
Scab, yes, unless it's really a lot of scab. It does not hurt the flesh of the apple if it has a little scab onto it or anything. That's one difference today in the marketing situation than it was 50 years ago. 50 years ago, we used to pack out 2 to 3 grades of apples. Unclassified, utilities, US #1, US #1 fancy. The US #1 fancy had no blemishes on them and color. Now, they're unclassified, which was a good market for them those days. It would have a little scab or maybe something from another insect, and which didn't hurt the apple at all. People were eager to buy them for pies and eat out the hand. Today, the customer has been changed to the point that they don't want any blemishes on an apple, which makes it more expensive to grow and everything in that line.
Can that attack the green apples as well as the red apples, or is it geared more to red than green?
Unfortunately, I think Washington State has hurt, I'm talking Red Delicious right now, has hurt our Red Delicious market because they can grow a real red delicious apple out there with the climate and everything, but they pick them before they should be picked. They ship them here on the East Coast, and it does not have the flavor that our eastern tree-ripened delicious have here. They taste like cardboard.
Styrofoam.
And I'm taking that one step further. I drive bus part-time for Bard College. And in the summer, we have summer programs. The cafeteria brought out boxes of California West Coast delicious. The kids would take one bite of them, or wouldn't take any of them. Bring them back, throw them out the next, when we came back. Well, I said to the people in the cafeteria, I'm going to bring a box of our Eastern delicious tomorrow and put them out instead of these others. I didn't have any of my own at the time. I went up here to Sorpus in Claremont and got a box of CA Red Delicious, local. And, you know, at the end of the day, there wasn't an apple left on the bus. They would take a bite of, oh, that's good, and then word got them out. and they ate the whole apple, didn't throw half of them out. But on the green apples, well, Granny Smith is a good green apple, and some of the other newer varieties which are green are good. But people have gotten educated, an apple should be all red. Our Macintosh really aren't all red to be really good. They're a natural two-tone apple.
Was
Really,
your
you
question the difference between red and green apples, or was it, does Scab prefer one
Scab.
color? No, it's an equal opportunity employer. There are some varieties that are Scab immune or resistant, and there is some differences in susceptibility between one variety or another, but it's independent of the color of the Scab.
Right.
I may be ahead with this question, but how many species of apples are there?
How many what?
Varieties.
We will cover that if you don't mind.
That's all right.
Okay. Let's continue a little bit on pest control. That's the old days of what they call a curculio catcher, where they would beat the tree and get this weevil out of the tree by knocking it out of the tree. And
Larry?
what I'm gonna do
Hey,
is...
Larry. Don't laugh at that too much, because about, how many years ago was that, Chuck? We were at that thing in... 3 years ago. We were at the cutting edge of the IPM ideas for the state. And they had a guy from, I believe it was Vermont, Massachusetts, who was trying to grow apples organically, and his control for curculio was to take something and beat the tree. And then he'd take a little torch and heat the ground up to kill him.
Yeah.
I guess I'm gonna get one of those for Sid.
Pull one on me here. Come on, Chuck.
You want me?
Chuck's had a beard for years, guys.
Oh, you didn't recognize me?
He's sitting right here. He's supposed to be up there. Thanks, Steve.
I'm gonna have to buy him lunch now. See?
What I'm going to do is just show some mixing, spraying apparatuses, so you guys can comment on it if you want. This is a mixing plant for a material they call the Bordeaux mix. Can anybody tell me what a Bordeaux mix is?
Lime and copper.
Lime and copper. What did it do?
It was a good, and we still use it.
Okay.
It's a good fungicide.
Okay, for fungus. And here's some guys spraying with a horse.
You still got that sprayer, Sid?
Still got the horses.
No.
I drove horses in a rig like that probably when I was 8 years old.
And what's the tank made out of?
Wood.
Cypress.
tank.
Cypress.
The old one-lunger
And
motor.
one long motor with the flywheels on it, double flywheel.
Like they're down to the fair down there.
And, well, I think I've got some other shots. There's some boys filling up.
Gee, a little labor efficiency there, huh?
Look at the Google.
See, they've got their spray suits on,
Yeah.
their protective gear.
There's your hat on.
Masks?
Now, what's
Anti-siphon device.
what's this rig right here for?
That's called
Water
a
rejector.
tower.
Okay. And what's that?
Well, that was to enable the
Get to the top of
guy to get the top of the tree.
35-foot tree.
Without falling off the machine.
Right. Spray, hang on to the hose, spray, and hang on at the same time with a team of horses jerking you along the orchard, huh?
Yeah, can you imagine hitting a woodchuck hole with
Oh,
on that tower?
Unbelievable.
You were pumping at 500 to 1,000 pound pressure on those rigs.
Really?
Really?
Oh, I didn't know.
Yeah, there's high power, high pressure pumps.
Here's some guys. There's another tower unit, and then there's actually,
See, now we're going back.
behind you, Chuck, is, see against the wall, there's a original three nozzle handgun unit. That's the type of thing that hold up there and spray against those trees.
The first ones that were bamboo, because they were so heavy, they made them out of bamboo to lighten them up.
Really?
Yeah, the rod part.
On that nozzle that you're holding up there, it might be of interest to know, without a doubt, that was manufactured right here in Red Hook, New York.
Oh, really?
Right here in the building where the IGA is now, before Grand Union moved in there. That was Double Quirl Spray Nozzle Company. I think Zitzes were the ones that run it. But that was manufactured, in fact, I've used a lot of them. In fact, I may have some of them left. But it was quite the thing.
Better lock them up.
What?
Barbara wants one?
No, it's made right here.
And what do you think this unit is?
That was the old duster.
Yeah,
Oh, yeah.
actually dusting, just throwing that powder up.
The last one of those I had is sold to Roger Hoffman.
And again, notice all the protective gear.
Yeah.
Were they expensive in their day?
No. But maybe dollar-wise it worth in comparison that way. The biggest trouble with those dusters is you dust here on the farm and the dust would end up 6 miles away. You just keep floating, especially in the evening you had that type
Oh, now
of
they're
air.
real protected. He's got the horses protected.
Yeah. That looks like probably a vineyard there. And here's one of those, it's a jury rig, I don't know what he's using for a pump on that.
When do you do that spraying? In the spring or?
Yeah, mostly.
Okay, let's move to harvesting. Here we see some gals harvesting in the orchard.
Well,
Tell me a little about what she's packing into.
Your wooden barrel,
Okay,
3 bushel barrel.
3 bushel. Okay, there's one behind Chuck. You can take a look at that.
That's a small.
that's the 3 bushel.
That's a 3. Huh? So probably weigh what? 150, you think, maybe pounds?
Oh, maximum.
Max, 125 maybe.
40 pounds to the bushel is,
Yeah,
Then you have the
Stand.
barrel too, see.
yeah, but the barrels weren't heavy.
yeah, they are. They're
We're a lot younger than that.
Yeah, I sure was. I was 6 years old when Prohibition went out.
Here we have some ladies picking again. And what are they using now for their picking buckets? Water baskets.
The old basket.
Baskets. All they made right up here in Taconic, New York.
Yeah.
Right.
Basket.
You wouldn't think they'd take that kind of weight.
Oh, yeah, they were solid, strong.
Well, how do they measure those skirts? That's what.
Ask them. I don't know about that.
Okay, there's some other kinds of baskets, and you'll see some behind Sid. A couple of different sizes. They tend to be narrow at the base. I don't know if that's a full
Three-quarter.
3/4 bushel, and the other one maybe is a full bushel then. And
She's galvanized.
you see that, you want to kind of point out that the rig
All that barrel press, yeah.
That's a unit. You want to explain that? Sid? How do you use it?
Well, each barrel had its own head. They weren't uniform enough. So when you got your barrels, you had to keep the head with the barrel, or it wouldn't fit. And then they faced the bottom of the barrel. They crawled head first into the barrel and faced one end of it with the platers, and then they filled the barrel, and then on the bottom end,
It's a piece
put
of
the
that.
press, and they jiggle the barrel, and the apples would be about this high above the top of the barrel, and then they put the lid on, or which is
It's a
end
piece
up
of
as the bottom, and then they just turn that and force it down.
Yeah.
The apples, the idea was the apples had to be tight, or they would bruise even worse. They had to keep them tight. And one of the big advantages in the barrel was that peddlers would buy them by the barrel and peddle them on the street. And when the evening came, it was time to go home to dinner, they just put the head back in the barrel and roll the barrel back under the steps somewhere and leave it right on the street. Nobody would bother them. They weren't accessible. I mean, they had a wooden barrel. Of course, that wouldn't stop the thieves today, but it seemed to be enough in that day that they could. And then the next morning, they come back and open up the barrel and start peddling again.
We used to ship a lot of those barrels of apples to England.
Well, aside from
They're taking, loading on the
from
boat
New
down
York
to
City,
taking to New
why,
York.
there was a little export market. But
Yeah.
aside from that, New York City was the lead market.
And how were they primarily transported to New York City?
Well, they started out by boat.
Right, steamboat, right?
The,
Tivoli docks?
The
Right.
night boat, yeah.
They'd load half the boat with paper from Socrates, come over to Tivoli Dock and fill out the
Right.
boat. Sometimes they didn't have room enough to take all that was down there in the freight house for it. The next day-
Would they use blocks of ice to do refrigeration or not?
No.
No.
They were on the apples were on the market the next morning,
Yeah, okay.
early the next morning.
But your primitive storages used
yeah.
ice to keep them till January, February, March, and that, before they came out with mechanical refrigeration. Yes.
Right. Now, who can tell me something about that ladder? Also notice that they're using metal buckets. What's special about that ladder?
Once tapered, so it can fit in, go up in the...
I fire anybody that would go thick with it like it is. With a pointed top.
Yeah, what'd you say, John?
It's tapered, so when they lay the ladder into the tree, they can work it in between the limbs without getting it caught. So that's why they would be tapered like that, because they could work in between the limbs
Right.
without knocking the fruit off, and it made it much easier.
It's like a smaller tree too.
Yeah, actually, with that one, yes, it is. Just show a couple more. You can see a guy way up on a big old tree.
Oh, he's got a ways to go, though.
Yeah, right.
Well, you packed his lunch before he went up.
Maybe that doesn't show too well. It just shows the barrels.
One difference I see in all these, they were packing these right out in the orchard. That you don't do anymore.
Right, okay.
Yeah.
Behind you, Chuck, is a picking bucket. bucket there. Can you hold that up? Now, this is what's used today?
It's very similar to this. Ones we use are hold about twice as much.
Yeah, bigger ones, right?
It's usually worn over one shoulder.
That's not correct for bushes.
Well, I know, but it's only got one strap, so. Some people wear them over two shoulders, but the
And,
strap isn't right. And I never liked it that way anyway. It opens up like this. It's full. Lean over the box, and let them out slowly so that they don't roll.
Okay, and after they went to, after they did barrels and baskets, they went to boxes. And these would hold what?
Bushel and an acre.
Right on, bushel and an eighth.
Or some was a bushel and a third. Some people's were bushel and a different ones.
We've had several discussions on how big is a bushel.
Yeah, these get to be about, close to 50 pounds, I think,
Yeah.
bushel and eighth. And you can imagine, you know, a whole orchard filled with these boxes, picking them up, putting them on trailers, putting them into storage. So what's done today now in comparison? What do you pick, what do the pickers pick into?
Nominal 20 bushel bin.
20 bushel bins.
What's that called?
Bulk bin.
Tote bin. And they're stored in that bin,
Yeah.
so put right into the bin, in the orchard, pulled out, right to storage. So they don't have to be handled that many times, eliminating some of the bruising potential. How do you pay your pickers?
The check.
By the bin.
They get paid piecework.
Yeah, piecework.
So much per bushel. And most of us use offshore labor, and they're guaranteed an hourly wage.
Around the 1st of August, and then the late apples finished end of October, generally by the 1st of November. So the harvest season used to figure Macintosh years ago was well, I guess you did grow some yellow transparents and stuff.
Yeah,
with
they
our-
were the first ones, and red ice cream.
Early Macintosh, I guess, but when Jersey Macs, Paul Reds, and Tidings came in, the early market became much bigger than I think ever the early Mac market was, right, Sid, would you say? That the early market today is substantially more than what it used to be.
I don't know.
But you know, we're losing that early market too, with
Yeah.
more of the CA storages and apples coming in from
Yeah.
southern hemisphere early, and our early apples used to be a fairly good moneymaker, but today the early apples aren't doing nearly as what they should be doing because of our world market has a lot to do with it. You got your Chilean apples, Brazilian apples coming in from the southern hemisphere.
Does anybody know of the same restrictions as far as what they spray it with? In those
That's a good
I
question.
think the EPA.
No one questions what they're spraying with. They're using less expensive chemicals than we are, with a lot less restrictions than what we are, especially here in New York State. Here in New York State, a lot of our chemicals that can be used throughout other states cannot be used in New York State until it becomes registered here in New York. That's another thing we're trying to do, is to get New York on the same, if it's approved in the rest of the country, that New York State could use too. Apogee, a new chemical which just got approved to us this year. We were the last state, I think, of the union that got approved.
It's a growth regulator.
New York
It only
DEC
costs,
New York DC has to review the data as well. That's why it takes longer to get something registered in New York. They don't typically take the federal government standards. They do their own review policy. They have their own review.
Well, my question would be, why are we importing stuff that we don't know what it's being sprayed with when we're so strict with the farmers that are here?
We'd like to know the answer to that.
About
3% of
It's the
imported
Walmart
produce gets
philosophy.
inspected, it's my understanding.
Sorry, I didn't hear you.
About 3% of imported produce is inspected, is my understanding.
I'm going to put that question back to you. When you go into a supermarket, do you ask the produce manager, where was this apple, where was this head of lettuce,
To be
where
very
was this
truthful
grown?
with you, I do check. Those little itty bitty round things that are, I do not buy fruit
But
if it comes from certain areas.
do you
because
know it? A lot of the fruit is shipped into this country and repacked as California or
I know, I just
nothing.
spent 4 months
And you
there and
think
I
it
learned
was
that there.
fruit
So I
grown
didn't eat
in
fruit
the
there.
United States, but it hasn't been. Especially on your fruit and vegetables, small fruits and vegetables, strawberries and that in particular. They're grown in Mexico and then processed, packed in California, and shipped as California produce.
I try to buy from the little local stands that are here
Is that right?
when they have.
When they have, yes.
Yes, when they have.
I know a lot of you do with our stand and all, but I mean, we're only seasonal.
In the,
Bert's a researcher from California, he might be able to shed some
Well,
light.
they had this, wasn't there ice cream that had strawberries in it a few years ago? That's exactly what happened. There were strawberries from Mexico, or repackaged in California, and a lot of people did get sick.
in the pictures of harvesting you showed earlier, where there were all those women, were those local women that were working in the
Well,
field?
most of those photos are either from the Teeter Farm or the Losey Farm in Upper Red Hook. So I'm going to assume that they were local women, but other than that, I don't know.
Yeah, there was no, there were practically no migratory workers till Second World War, the 40s. It was all local help before that.
And the local help were looking for apple picking and seasonal picking, strawberries and that. I can remember when I was a little kid, we grew a lot of strawberries, and we don't grow any now. But a lot of the people would come across from Saugerties over, and they'd fight to be able to be the first ones to pick out the best rows in the morning there. And some of the mornings, there were so many coming over, they had a rowboat. There were so many, they couldn't all fit in the boat. Some of them would swim alongside the boat. And at that time, we were paying 2 cents a quart to pick strawberries. But they would make $2 and $3 a day, and that was a big wage back then.
What year was that? What year was that?
What year?
That would be in the early 40s, late 30s. And then, of course, when the war came on, we had quite a few farmerettes, as they were called. And we had a camp down there in Tivoli, which was the old Catholic worker one that you might recognize that name. It's now a private estate, the Emory Estate. But they had girls from Cooper Union, Hunter College, and places like that in New York City.
Can we talk some varieties for a bit, especially those that are older varieties? There are a lot of these I don't recognize at all, but
Thank you.
Mother, I like that one.
Ogdensburg, yes.
Rhode Island Green, Ben Davis, Baldwin,
Yeah.
York Imperial, there.
What
Paul Pippin.
what about Baldwin and Ben Davis? What are the? I know a couple of things about them. What can you tell me that are special about, especially Baldwin's?
Well, there's always about 2 or 3 people who come to the stand every year and say, do you have any Baldwins? They were the best apples in the world.
I still got 2 trees left.
Do you?
Yeah.
Okay, let's send them over.
Ben Davis was a very good shipping apple. It was a very hard apple.
It was Ben Davis that they used to put on the ships, right?
That was
Yeah.
one of them.
Sailors, huh?
And you could keep it under common ordinary, going back to your ice storage. and we keep till March, and it would bring a premium doing it that way.
Okay.
My
So they
father,
were
my
putting
father
Wine
said,
sack, well, that's still around.
Scurvy?
my father said that the only Ben Davis that that ever tasted like anything at all was when he kicked out of the wheel rut in March. He was thirsty, you know, and he ate the apple.
Fall far from the tree, doesn't it?
King was a good apple too. It was a bigger apple than a Baldwin. Red. It made a good pie.
Which one?
King, Thomas King, Tompkins King.
Ben Davis is one of the parents of Cortland.
Oh.
Of course, it should be called the Revenge of the Ben Davis.
Talking about not looking at all the grass.
Wealthy used to be a good, not a real early, mid-season early apple.
Just before Max.
Right. Only trouble, it tended to drop so badly.
They were my mother's favorite pie apple.
Oh,
She always used to leave the pies down because they were so juicy. When you bake the pie,
Right, yeah.
they would always boil over.
Right, right.
But gee, I saw some pies being produced at a little place out in Arizona last winter, and they had the apples heaped up like that. And then when they were done, they put a big tray in front of the oven, and they just poured that, just wasted that juice. Poured it on, supposedly on the ground. It was lost. I mean, I never saw pies that were rounded up like that. They were really, and they were good. I guess they were Granny Smith's.
Could all those apples grow here?
Well, that's one of the problems. We can't grow Granny Smith.
See?
Our season is too short.
Supposedly, yeah.
I know, but-
This standard is for here, but.
Well,
What's that?
I mean,
It's like slightly south here, it says Delaware,
Well, no,
Maryland,
it says
Virginia.
Delaware. Yeah, but that's for the next.
Oh, the next category.
Yeah, New England States, New York, Pennsylvania, show a lot here, grow these. Right.
Well, it doesn't have the winter banana on it.
No. You don't have Wolf River onto it. You don't have Alexander onto it.
What about some of the more popular varieties nowadays?
Yeah, what week is it? Well, we all, Macintosh was a thing that we grew, but that's kind of fallen out of favor. Of course, we have a lot of competition with some of these newer varieties like, Fuji and Gala and things like that store a little bit better and will stand up to a little rougher handling. Because I think when you go to work in a grocery store, your test is to see how far you can drop an apple and put it on display. But Empire is a big
That's a good newcomer.
newcomer. It was named in 1966. It's not new.
Still haven't caught on yet.
We need more production.
Does anybody know
Too
how
many
the
produce
variety
for what
of
we
apple
sell.
is created?
I'm sorry?
Yes.
What's that?
Typically, they take, during bloom, they'll take one apple that they want to cross with another, and they'll net that tree, and then they'll take pollen from the flowers on the other apple that they want, and they hand apply that pollen to the flowers of the netted tree so that the bees don't bring in pollen from other ones. They grow those apples, they plant the seeds from those apples, and they'll plant out several hundred seeds from that tree, so the flowers they hand pollinated, and then 7 or 8 years later they'll get fruit on those trees. And that's the real slow part. And because when you plant an apple from seed, which we never do, none of our trees are planted from seeds, because apples require cross-pollination. The cross-pollination gives a myriad of different genetic combinations. So the seeds are not true to the apple. If you planted, say, 200 seeds out of Macintosh, you might get 1 or 2 that eventually would bear apples that resembled a Macintosh, and the rest would be completely different or small, inedible, various combinations. So then out of those several hundred, when the first couple of years they fruit, they select ones that look promising. And it's a very long process. And today, with tissue culture, there is the possibility of speeding it up a fair amount. And I don't know that it's being done yet, but with genetic engineering, there is the possibility of speeding it up to get desirable characteristics out of one apple or even another plant.
And not wait 7 years.
Right. Well, yeah, well, Dave mentioned that the Empire was named in '66. The original cross was made in 1948. And the cross is Delicious by McIntosh. And it was made in New York State. But that's typical of the time that it takes between the time the cross is made and the apple might be selected and named. Although that's getting shorter, there are ways to make that happen faster. But a lot of the apples that we're planting now are crosses that were made in other parts of the world. Like we're planting Gallus, which is from New Zealand, Fuji, which is from Japan. We've planted one called Sansa, which is a cross from Japan with Gala and another apple.
When was Fortune ever done? Do you remember when that was? I remember I got the dogwood when I was, way back when I was in college.
I don't remember when that one was crossed. That's a cross between Spy and Empire, which to us it looks like a good apple, but don't wait to see it in your supermarket.
No.
You got to come to the farm and buy it. One of the problems with that is
Roseville Farm or...
During the course of the year, what is the schedule that you have to adhere to in order to get the apple to produce? What are the things you have to do to the apple tray?
well, typically in the winter we prune, and then early in the spring, depending on the rootstock and the variety, some combinations we put some fertilizer on the ground, and then we have to protect them from the various diseases and any insects. And just about this time, or slightly before, we chemically thin the trees. Because I think there was a quote in something that Larry put on the screen quite a while ago that said that half the trees were barren on the property, the trees that were with this property. And that was very typical back 40 to 50 years ago and longer, that trees would only bear every other year. And so today we apply various chemicals that kind of give the tree a little shock.
You might want to say why trees bear one every other year.
Well, yeah, they bear every other year because they tend to, in the year that they are on, they have a huge crop of flowers, and they set a lot of fruit. And then what Larry had mentioned earlier, that in July when they're initiating buds for the next year, all that fruit is using up all the tree's energy, so there's little left to set any buds for the next year. So the next year there's no flowers and no fruit. And that cycle goes on year after year. I mean, if you had a spring frost and you lost most of your blossoms, you might have fruit the next year. They would set flowers. So we manipulate the tree using various
Well, we try to.
We try to, yeah. Yeah, it's a little, there's a lot of art in that and not as much science. There's more
So
guesswork.
you're thinning off the buds and the fruit?
Well, we're thinning off fruit that's like the size of a pencil eraser. At that stage and slightly bigger, we're putting a little stress on the tree, and that competition, depending on the weather and a lot of other factors, makes a lot of them fall off. And
Just the crop growth.
yeah.
One of the chemicals that we use is a mimic to the chemical that's produced by the seeds in growing fruit. So it basically makes the tree think that there's other apples. Basically, it's with a cluster of fruit, there's 5 and sometimes 6 flowers in one cluster, and sometimes you get them all to grow, but the one that's the largest will tend to tell the others in its own happily way that, hey, I'm the king here, you guys take a hike, and what we do is we make those other ones think that there's, getting too complex.
We're sending a stronger signal.
Yes, we're trying to fool Mother Nature.
Changes the seed cavity. Without the seeds, the apple doesn't set.
Right.
Now, before chemical thinners, what did you guys have to do? Was there any option?
Well, you could hand thin to help the fruit size, but it didn't help the return bloom.
You couldn't get it done soon enough.
Yeah.
But it didn't matter. In this period, especially during Prohibition, why, at least half the apples went for juice anyway, and small apples made just as good juice as big apples. So it didn't really matter.
What part do the bees play? You have to bring in bunches of bees every year, or?
Bunches.
Herds.
I heard of bees,
In the old days, I think each of these farms probably had, a couple of hives. But nowadays, most orchards have a guy, a beekeeper, who brings and drops the hives at strategic points in the orchard.
Every year?
Yep.
Oh.
You actually just pay
And
for
what
it.
month of the year do they do that?
During bloom.
Early May,
Oh, okay.
Yeah, right.
sometimes
But
later.
that'll vary, because when the blooms are out, it varies.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We're always surprised when they
Think Mother's Day. Usually full.
So there's a big competition then for, I mean,
Well, you better have them lined up in advance.
oh, okay.
There are enough bees to go around, I guess. Is what it is.
And
Seems to be,
there's
yeah.
no, disease and that these bees get. They get corona mite, and there's what's the disease?
Now, that was the problem, that mite
Corona
that
mite.
got into the native
Wipes out
bees
these
in the hives.
your sons.
Most of the bees that we rent are overwintered in the south.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and the parasites are less problem with a warmer winter.
How do you rent a bee, though?
It's just,
Kelly Services and say, I'm a bee.
Do they pick them up?
Oh, yeah, they're in hives. They're in
Remember a few
which
years
are
back down
small.
near Washington DC, this truck was coming up with a load of bees and it upset there. And one problem, they had all the wild bees flying around there. Remember that?
Yeah.
That was 4 or 5 years ago.
We rent them from a guy who's out of Massachusetts, but he keeps them over the winter, usually in Louisiana. And they're in hives, which are a little bit bigger than that box. And there's 6 hives strapped to a pallet. And he comes by usually in the evening, sometimes in the middle of the night. And he'll have, I don't know how many pallets on the truck, quite a few pallets on the truck. And he has a trailer behind the truck with a forklift on it. He unloads the forklift, takes off however many pallets. And at some farms, he puts them right in the orchard. At our farm, he puts them either on the ground or on the truck, and then I put them in the orchard where I want them with our own forklift. And then anywhere from a week to some years, almost 2 weeks later, he'll come back one night, and away they go.
the bees all return to the hive in the evening when it gets dark. Or if you get a shower, they come back.
That may have explained the attire in the photo of those women with the long clothes. They always choose bees, I think.
Oh, yeah.
Well, yeah.
Years ago.
No, that was the style. That's what-
Years ago, the bees were all native. There were hives that people kept and also wild hives, but a lot of the diseases today have wiped out the native honeybees. But we do have other species of bees that are called solitary bees and also bumblebees. And they do a lot of the pollination on some of our earlier flowering crops, like peaches.
Well, peaches are self-fertile, aren't they?
Well, yeah, but they still pollinate them. And peaches and cherries and apricots. And actually this year there were a lot of those other bees, but we had very ideal weather for cross-pollination this year. It was warm, it wasn't too windy, and it was sunny every day.
We haven't found a chemical thinning for peaches, and we still have to hand thin peaches. And they are thick this year. I mean, they're like hair on a dog's back.
And Sid, approximately what percentage of those peaches do you actually have to take off to get a sizable peach?
Oh, the way they look, this year, looks like you have to take at least 80%,
80%
maybe more.
And when will
Get
you
them
do that?
spaced
How
out.
long?
Oh, we'll start at the end of this month, early June.
Yeah, very soon we have to start.
Right now.
Yeah.
Is everything kept far away from each other? Are the peaches kept far from the apples? Or are they planted close by,
We try and keep peaches and cherries
together?
away from each other.
Away.
Other than that, there aren't too many problems, although there's some specific diseases that can go from various things, and some of them we're still learning about.
The choke cherry is the thing you want to try and keep away from peaches. That's the host for the insects that causes the X disease in peaches, is from the choke cherry, primarily.
Which is a wild cherry, it's not one that we plant. It's a wild shrub.
Well, we're getting pretty close here. Let me give you a couple of figures now that I hope that you kind of get a feel for the science of fruit production. And we haven't even covered frost protection, which is another issue. But these are current figures, okay? The average price, 2,000 for a box of apples is between $9 and $11, okay, per box.
What kind of box are you talking about now?
Bushel, 40 pound,
Oh,
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
That's packed.
Yeah.
okay, $9 to $11.
That's wholesale.
They cost,
That wholesale.
this is to the grower, Okay.
yeah.
Costs $2 per box to store it, $4 per box to pack it, $3 per box to grow it. That's $9. Now you can do the math, and you know what these guys are faced with in terms of what it takes to produce this commodity and what the market is providing to them.
The picking fee isn't even there.
Well, that was in the $3.
That would be, I think, in probably the pack out.
All packed.
I would believe, yeah. So,
That's if you
That
get-
figure, if you round that to $10 a box, that's about 25 cents a pound. And you know what you're paying in the store.
yeah, so that's what these guys are getting. So, I know, you're reading the paper about farmland preservation and all this, but you can preserve the farmland, but the bottom line is that we actually have to preserve farming. Okay, you can save all the land in the world, but if you can't make a living on it, so what? So keep that in mind and support your local farmers and growers. They're here, they're established, they produce excellent quality, they're knowledgeable, they've got a really great historical base, and I think they deserve the support that the community should give them. And I would like to really,
You have a question back there?
yes.
Could you address the purpose of grafting?
It depends if you feel we have time. It's a little after 9 now, and I'll leave that up to Barbara. We have refreshments.
Well, I think we can answer that question. We do have refreshments, so you can ask some of these questions privately, but maybe that's something everybody's interested in.
Before you go on to that, while you're talking about the state of the farm, when you first started, you showed the slide of all the apple trees, and you made the comment that everybody had some apple trees, everybody had some segment of farm, vegetables, animals. We're sort of coming about again because in the 40s and the 50s, everybody sort of split. You became a dairy farmer, you became a fruit farmer, you became a vegetable farmer. Now we're back getting into diversification, growing vegetables for farm markets or farmers markets, going to the city, trying to direct market, get out of the wholesale market. All the growers that I know who 10 years ago would have said, well, I'm not going to ever grow pumpkins, I'm not going to grow strawberries, I'm not going to do this or do that, I'm a fruit grower, I grow apples. Well, now everybody is trying different things to make the farm viable. So everything comes in cycles and circles, and we're sort of going back into the circle of diversification into other commodities rather than just specializing in apples. And it's even going, people either specialized in apples and didn't do stone fruits, peaches or cherries or other things, but now everybody is planting some of these other types of fruits, if they aren't at the very least doing some vegetables or something else to supplement the farm. So I just wanted to make that kind of quick.
Good point. Full cycle. It's up to you. If you feel you can cover grafting, or, I mean, it's 2 minutes.
Grafting, well, I guess Chuck said that basically the reason we graft, there's a couple reasons to graft fruit trees. The seeds from a McIntosh tree won't give you, a McIntosh apple won't give you a McIntosh tree. So what you have to do if you want a McIntosh tree is get a rootstock, whether it be from a seed or from a cutting or whatever. Plant that, and then you take a bud or a shoot from a McIntosh tree and you graft it onto the other rootstock. What you have to do is you have to match up the cambium layers, that's the growing layer just under the bark, and you make a seal and so that it doesn't dry out, and that's that's why we do that. That's why we graft trees or bud them, like what we get from the nursery. Does that answer your question, or you had something else in mind?
I'm just curious. Years ago, just for the effect, I guess, up here at Cookingham, you see the beautiful red delicious, and at the very top you see the golden delicious that grafted. And I was wondering what
That was for cross-pollination.
Yeah.
Because trees, one variety needs a pollen from another variety to set a crop. So if you have a solid block of one variety, you're out of luck. So,
And they discovered some number of years ago that red delicious flowers are constructed in such a way that a bee can reach in and get the nectar without touching the stamens where the pollen is. And so red delicious take more bees per acre to pollinate. Once they learn to do that, they're not effective pollinators. So the more bees you have on an acre red delicious, the more they have to learn to do that. Dumb instead of smart.
I usually
right.
grow.
You need the novices that don't know how to do it. Without going across the anthers, I don't know whether I got my flower balance.
The virgin bees.
That covers almost all of them.
Except for the queen, huh?
Except for the queen.
That's right. I didn't think of that.
I usually grow crabapple trees in the orchard. And you take out a windy season when the bees aren't working so much in the trees because of the wind, the pollen will blow from the crabs over into the McIntosh delicious and such too. The wind, it can be a good pollinator.
Yeah. Well, some varieties are self-fertile. One year in the distant past, we had a lot of real cold, cloudy, rainy weather during bloom. Bloom was, it was 2 or 3 weeks early. And we had a lot of self-fertile varieties, and they came through. Baldwin is one. Wealthy is another. They are fertilized on their own pollen.
And getting back to grafting, some of the home garden nurseries and that, they will sell you trees with, say, 4 or 5 different varieties, all on the same tree. One limb will be a McIntosh, next limb will be Empire, next Delicious, then Golden Delicious. So one tree, you got all the different varieties.
How much is a tree?
How much is a tree?
How much money you got?
How big a tree do you
How
want?
big a tree? How many you buying?
Yeah.
What do we pay for?
What do you pay for
Between $5 and $10.
Yeah, that's a pretty good range.
Yeah,
The cherries are the most,
that's in value.
those are the cheapest.
But that's, what size are they?
Whips generally.
They're half to 3/4 inch diameter.
So 5 years before it bears fruit, or 4? Or?
We have picked apples the second year.
Yeah.
Some trees that have grown very well and had limbs on them when we planted them, but that's unusual. We hope to get a few apples the third year.
A lot of times a smaller tree will take off and grow faster than a bigger tree when you set it. It's not as much shock to the tree.
Depends on the roots were lost when they dug them.
How many apples can you get in a good year? How many apples per acre? How many bushels per acre?
Depends on your root stock.
I have seen,
800,000 bushel.
I have seen Rome's, which is a very productive variety, yield 1,500 bushels to the acre, but that's exceptional.
If you look at New York State average, was it 500?
About 500.
Yeah,
around
500.
Something like that.
But do you sell them all?
You better.
For less than it costs to produce.
You see, because we make so little money, we're gonna make it up on vine.
They all find, generally, all the fruit find someplace in the market, whether it's cider or, fresh pack. They generally all find a home somewhere. Although cider is, used to be, somewhat of a salad, but it's even below that now. It's just an outlet to get rid of your fruit, so you don't have to dump it somewhere.
With our, this China dumping into this country, it's killed our juice market. We do not have hardly any juice market left. We did get it through the Farm Bureau and National Apple Institute and other organizations. They did get a tariff put on apple concentrates coming in from China. But now, China has gotten around it, and they're sending it in as frozen product, and there isn't any tariff right now onto it. And that's putting our American juice plants out of business. We used to have numerous ones here in the area. Seidel in Germantown, as you folks know, from the Germantown area, and others down in Highland that were Grancelli's up here. But now, as I know, the only one is Brooklyn Bottling Works down in Milton Keynes, really taking any juice from this area.
I've asked a lot of questions, but I need to ask this one. Can you export to other countries your product?
Yes. A lot of our empires go to England.
But there's a lot more restrictions on what we ship out than what the restrictions are when they ship back into us.
Yeah. The English importers send inspectors to inspect the packing houses, and they look at every detail in the packing houses. And if they don't like what they see, then they don't go. The apples don't go, they'll get them somewhere else.
How much of that does a local farmer depend on? Any of it? Any export?
Well, we all grow, almost all of us grow empires, and a fair percentage of them are exported. None of us in this, in this group have our own packing houses, but quite a few of our apples go through Saltpaw's packing house in Claremont, and he does work with another outfit that exports.
Is that what that is right up on Route 9, that
Yeah.
plant you see, there's the big boxes?
Right in Claremont, yeah.
So he's just packing, he's not making anything, I mean...
Yeah, he doesn't make any processed products. He stores and packs apples. He also is a grower. He grows apples too, but he handles quite a few of our apples.
You may be mistaking the Hudson Process facility up in Livingston. The Saltpaws is right behind the Blue Roof Market.
Yeah,
Oh, yeah, no, okay. So
That one in Livingston actually made slices and dices, but that's not in business anymore.
Oh, isn't it?
It's been sold to another company that may make applesauce, but we don't know yet.
That's another one that's been put out of business.
Yeah, they weren't there last year.
Huh.
we had apples that had gone there previous years that went to a processor in Virginia, but the price was about $1 a bushel less, and so those trees are in the wood pile now.
Another thing on this apple export deal, our good neighbors, we have a good relationship with Canada. Now, if they have a surplus of apples in Canada, a good growing season, they will not take, the government will not let us ship apples into Canada until they have a need for apples, whereas we'll take them anytime.
Well, we're generous.
We have coming out of our ears, and yet they can ship Canadian apples into the United States. I mean, we're not protective of our own selves here.
Why aren't we protected?
Thank you.
And that's true.
There's a very large issue of free trade, and if we tell another country we're not going to take their apples with them, they'll say we're not going to take your computers, or something like that. And it's much more complicated than just fruit and vegetables, and it's one of those difficult things, yeah, that's kind of out of our hands. But it's up to individual consumers can make a choice every time they buy fruit or vegetables, and try and buy, domestic and local.
But it's not just fruit and vegetables. It's
Oh, no, it's many things that used to be made in this country aren't made here anymore. They try and find a pair of shoes made in this
try to
country.
find clothes.
Yeah, shoes and clothes. But it's really something that's out of our hands. And so that's part of why we're doing what John was talking about, that we're trying to sell more locally. When I came home from Cornell in 1978, we had approximately 55 or 60 acres of apples, about a dozen pear trees, and maybe 6 or 8 plum trees. Now we probably have almost a little bit less apples than that, but we also grow peaches, apricots, cherries, pears, plums, and about 20 different vegetables, and which we sell at farmers markets in Westchester County, and also at the farm.
Aside from looking at what we buy, people in this room or people watching the show, what can we personally do? Do you write to someone? Do you call someone? Complain to someone?
Well, you buy local whenever you can. You can talk to senators and congresspeople and ask for common sense restrictions and inspections of imported produce. I don't think it's ever going to stop. Go ahead.
I didn't want to interrupt you. But we've been trying to get labeling of country of origin of produce required, in the grocery store, so we know where our things are coming from.
And what's in them?
Pardon me?
And what's in them or sprayed on them?
Oh, I don't know about that, but if they would only label them as the country of origin, then you could pick and choose.
How can they do that if they repack in California?
That could be a problem.
Take a moment and introduce you to each one of these wonderful apple farmers, and I'm going to ask your name and where is your, wait a minute now, wait till I get the mic there, and where is your apple farm located? Is it an apple farm? Yeah.
Yes. My name is Claude Potts. Our farm is located on Route 9G, Tivoli, New York.
And how long have you been farming?
All my life, and it's a family farm. My grandfather, my father, probably dates back to the 1850s or earlier.
And you work 18 hours a day? Right?
Right.
And your name, please?
Sid Mead from Mead Orchards, and we're on Sism Road, which is off West Curly Corners.
In Red Hook?
In Red Hook, yeah.
And how long have you been farming?
50, this is my 58th year.
You're younger than him. Right?
Not much.
Not much. Your name?
I'm Dave Fraley. My farm is located in Upper Red Hook, or Red Hook, Northern Red Hook, on Fraley Lane. It's Rose Hill Farm. What else did you want to know?
How long have you been farming?
Me personally, well, when I graduated college in '75, I came back to the farm, and the business has been under my name since '79, but my family's been there since 1798, so we're old and crusty here.
Deep-rooted.
I'm Chuck Mead of Mead Orchards, and I'm Sid's son. And I've been farming since 1978. And as he mentioned, our farm's been in the family since 1916.
Now, did you go to college?
Yes.
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 We were roommates.
You were roommates. I'm not going to touch that, guys. Go on. Your name?
John Hardiman from Hardiman Orchards, located on Route 199, just west of the village of Red Hook.
John, they said that they had the last batch of your cider here. Did you have to eliminate that portion of your farm?
No, I still make cider, but it's just getting late in the season. The apples are losing some of their flavor, and I just felt the quality of the cider was dropping off, so I just stopped making cider at this time.
Well, gentlemen, I want to tell you, I come to the Elmendorf quite often, and this particular forum they had, I found so interesting, because your business, it was a domino effect from what I saw, from some of the equipment that was manufactured here in Red Hook that is no longer in existence, to the baskets that are no longer to the bees. So you really generated a lot of money for a lot of people and not really made that much yourself. I don't get it, but that's it, isn't it?
That's very true. That's the reason I have to work more than one job.
But you remind me a lot of the cow farmer. Farmers in general, I think no matter what your crop is, you have the same problem.
True.
Yeah. But you feed us, and you take care of us and nurture us, so I'm sorry that you're not making more money, and I'm sorry they're importing stuff that we don't even know what it's sprayed with. Shame on us.
You know, I've been told that we don't need you farmers and that. We can always go to the grocery store and buy our food and that. We don't have to depend on you. They don't realize where the grocery store gets their food. It comes from us. We're the backbone of the country.
That's right. I will tell you, I'm not going to mention too much on camera, but I was in another state, and they were importing meat. And I stopped, this is truthful, I stopped eating meat because I took a look at what I ordered and I thought, that is not what I'm accustomed to eating in New York. And I looked again and I said, where did this come from? And they told me, I said, no, thank you, I don't want it. And that was, this is truthful, very, very truthful. So I thank you for supplying us with wonderful apples. I have great memories of a childhood with apple pies and all that great stuff. And they had to come from some of your farms here. You're dating back to the 1700s. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I hope you enjoyed this evening's show. And please remember the faces of these gentlemen behind me. They work 18-hour, long hours, and they produce a product that we should be enjoying grown here in our community. So stop by their stands and check it next time you go to your fruit stand. Where is it coming from? Thank you. Stay well. Take care, and we'll see you next week. Thank you.